A story of two nations under one president, not divided by their political or religious beliefs, but by money. 67-year-old Mohammed Mitwalli represents the overspill of Egypt's poor, most of whom left their rural homes to head for the Egyptian capital in pursuit of a better lifestyle. But he and his family only made it as far as this squalid makeshift home at Dweika, east of Cairo. 21 years of life in a labyrinth of dingy alleyways amongst heaps of stinking rubbish.
Jobs were scarce in Upper Egypt, so I left to Cairo for a better life. But my situation hasn't improved. I'd give anything to move where people know I exist.
Ironically, it's only when disaster strikes that the 10 million inhabitants of Egypt's shanty towns have any hope of being heard. A rock slide in Dweika last year killed 100 people and led the government to offer free housing to slum dwellers, giving them a taste of what a better life could be like. But if you take a trip to the perimeters of Cairo, there is no doubt about it. The grass is greener on the other side. With several development projects still underway, Cairo's landscape has drastically changed, with closed gated communities offering a lap of luxury for those who can afford it. This lush compound is one of Cairo's first. What was once vacant desert land has been sold off to private investors at cheap price to give the rich the kind of life that only their money can buy. Private pools, golf courses, international schools, and spacious four-bedroom villas, making the poor-rich divide ever more evident. But amidst this city planning, some experts are concerned about the direction that private investments are taking in Egypt.
There's been a repeated phenomenon of the rich getting fed up with living among the poor, who tend to accumulate, and they'll start a completely new development, which will be fancy and wonderful for a few years, maybe a generation, and then slowly the poor will move into the new place, and that will be abandoned by the rich for yet another one.
For now, residents of these communities have little to complain about.
Cairo's air is polluted. The city is too crowded. Here, the air is cleaner and there isn't any traffic. That's why we moved.
As the gap between the rich and the poor widens and Egypt's wealthy retreat from the old city of Cairo, one thing is certain, at least for now. Those less fortunate are not welcome here. Amr Kahki, Al Jazeera, Cairo.
definitions of ways in which we can actually measure development that are written out in your exam specification. So what I'd like you to do is take up a whole A4 page with this. This left-hand column can go in the margin of an A4 page and split the rest of the page into two columns. If you want, you can. You don't have to write out every row now. You can just simply write out the rows as the slides come up. But just to show you here, we've got 9 rows on this diagram. Okay, now, whilst you're copying that table out, let's just have a think about measuring development for a start. Development, as we're going to talk about in the lesson, in next lesson, is it's about how countries change and hopefully improve. Improve not just in terms of wealth, but improving in terms of the lives of the people who live in that country. And these different measures of development are different ways in which we can start to work out how well a country is going in that direction. Too often measures of development just take into account wealth. As we know, wealth isn't the answer to everything, but as we're going to see, having a rich country can actually hopefully improve things for the lives of people in that country, both in terms of their health, education, and the sorts of lives they live. But we're going to go through and look at these different measures of development now. In the definition, please just copy out the definition. I'm going to show you a map of each of the things, but we're also going to be thinking about, I want you to write some comments about each measure. Maybe some of the ways in which these measures are a good indicator of development, and maybe some of the ways in which they don't really show us an awful lot about development. Okay, now, not wishing to confuse you totally, but when we talk about the wealth of a country, there are 3 abbreviations, 3 acronyms that are commonly seen. And really, for the sake of your GCSEs, they mean virtually the same thing. The exam syllabus, confusingly, specifies that you need to know GNP, and then you need to know GNI per person. Well, I'm just going to tell you what these 3 things stand for, and you can, in your exams, use these terms interchangeably. In reality, they do mean quite specific things, but for the sake of your GCSEs, we will assume they're a similar thing. They're all looking at the wealth of a country. I'll just quickly outline the basic differences. They all relate to how much money is made in a country by either producing something for sale or by doing a service for sale. So, for example, in a country, if someone sells a TV to someone in a shop, then the value of that TV goes towards the country's gross domestic product, gross national product, or gross national income. It gets added to a big list of numbers. Similarly, if a lawyer represents someone in court and they charge that person £1,000, that number, that figure of £1,000 also gets added to these 3 things. So over the course of a year, in a country, these numbers become huge, in the region of trillions of pounds or trillions of dollars every year for the very biggest countries. And so as a measure of how much wealth is generated in a country, these are pretty accurate, especially for countries that record these things very well. The differences between the 3, the gross domestic product is everything that is bought or sold within a country's borders. So within Britain's borders, everything that's bought and sold within Britain's borders gets added to its gross domestic product. The difference between the gross national product is that the gross national product only includes companies that actually have a nationality of that country. So the gross national product of Britain only includes British companies. However, what it does include as well is what British companies do abroad. So, for example, if you have a British company like BP, BP, massive multinational company, a lot of its business is done abroad, but everything that BP does gets added to Britain's gross national product. But for example, Starbucks, an American company, anything that Starbucks does in Britain does not get added to Britain's gross national product. As you can see, they are similar, but for some countries they can be quite different if they've got, for example, lots of foreign companies working in their country. Now, gross national income is slightly different again, because what gross national income does is it takes into account the payment of business taxes. Don't ask for the details. I won't get bogged down in the details. As I said, they broadly mean the same thing. They broadly come up with the same figures, and they are all a measure of the wealth of a country. So what does it look like? Well, first row of your table then, copy out this definition, the gross domestic product. Once you copy that out, you can pause it or listen to me warbling on. So this is a map then of gross domestic product. As you can see here, the countries, the darkest countries here, have gross domestic products of more than $2,000 billion per year. So that's $2 trillion per year. So the biggest countries in the world by that are clearly America, Japan, China, and then Britain, Germany and France are simply the biggest economies in terms of how much they buy and sell. But what this doesn't show us is some small countries, like small by area and small by amount of people, they're never going to have a high gross domestic product simply because they are a small country. And yet China has a quarter of the world's population, so it's not surprising really that it's the second biggest economy in the world. What this doesn't take into account GDP, it doesn't take into account how many people there are in the country. So what is often calculated is the GDP per head, sometimes referred to as per capita. But what this is they take that big figure and they divide it by the number of people in the country. And what this kind of shows now, it kind of evens that out. It takes into account how big a country is, but you can still see that, you know, America, Western Europe, Japan, these are rich countries. Whereas if you look at China, China was, or on that previous figure, the top 2 or 3 countries in the world by its total. But as soon as you divide that total by the number of people that live there, it's no longer as you can see, as productive per person. So we've got slight differences here. Okay, our third measure, we're going to look at something to do with the population here. Now, the death rate is, it's not how quickly people die, it's simply how many people die, expressed as a per 1,000 population. So it's a bit like, it's a tenth of a percentage, really. And you can see, well, does this match what you think? I mean, one of the obvious things to think is that if you live in a poor country, you're more likely to die. But actually, you can see here that Western Europe has a relatively high death rate, equivalent to, or not far off, or in fact higher than many North African countries, higher than most of America. So why would that be? We're rich countries, yet we have a higher death rate than most of North and South America. Well, the simple answer is that death rate doesn't really tell us an awful lot about how developed a country is. Of course, the very poorest countries are likely to have very high death rates because of a lack of medical care, etc. But what explains Europe? Well, hopefully you've kind of worked it out. A simple answer is that Europe has a lot of old people living in it, and those old people, with the best will in the world, are more likely to die than young people. So it doesn't always give us a clear indication of the richest countries and the poorest countries. However, the birth rate of a country, the number of people, number of live births per 1,000 population, does more accurately reflect the development in terms of the economy of these countries. We can see here that the so-called north, the so-called developed countries in North America, Europe, etc., tend to have low births per 1,000 population, whereas the poorer countries of the world, most notably sub-Saharan Africa, but also countries in South Asia and South America, tend to have higher births per 1,000 population. So maybe birth rate is a better measure of development. Well, have a think, and I want you to have a think about why that might be the case. Why is it that in richer countries you tend to have fewer children being born? Have a think about that, and we'll talk about that next lesson. Now, here's an interesting map. We're going to see a couple of these maps coming up. This is a map from World Mapper, which is a website which transforms normal choropleth maps, which are shaded in different colours according to certain data. It actually changes that by redrawing the country a different size dependent on the data it's trying to represent. So this map here is showing the growth rate of these countries. So in other words, you simply take how many people are being born in a country, you take away the number of people dying, and this tells you how fast a country is growing. And you can see here that there are some parts of the world that are growing much more rapidly than others, and they're represented by where they are enlarged. So we can see that India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, these countries here, dominating the world in terms of their growth. China to a similar extent, Mexico dominating North America quite significantly, many parts of Africa, but not all parts of Africa. You can see some parts like South Africa really quite squidged together. You got other parts like Nigeria, etc., really expanding. Whereas other parts, Europe, is hardly represented at all, showing that actually the population in Europe is not expanding at all naturally, or certain parts are anyway. So is this a measure of development? Maybe the more developed you are, the less likely you are to grow. Again, is that right? Does that make sense? Okay, the next measure to put on your table is infant mortality. And there's a definition up here, get that into your table. The number of deaths of children less than 1 year of age per 1,000 live births. And again, this kind of, instead of looking just at the death rate of a country, in other words the total population, look at just one specific group of a country. And the specific group represented here is infants under 1 year old. Now it's a very, very sad statistic this, but there are parts of the world you can see here that are in the reds and the pinks. So we've got pink countries here, a couple of red countries around here, where over 1 in 10 children die before they reach 1 year old. I mean, it's shocking, absolutely shocking, compared to less than 1% in the developed world of North America and Europe. So is this telling us a little bit more about development? What is this telling us about hospitals in a country, the neonatal care in a country, the cleanliness of births and the treatment and doctors available for births? What is that telling us about a country? So have a think about that. Okay, this statistic probably links in with the previous one. Again, this is a World Mapper map showing the number of doctors per 100,000 people. We can see where the doctors are in the world, quite frankly. The doctors are in USA, Europe, China, Japan, maybe bits of South America, maybe India, but certainly not sub-Saharan Africa. Now, is it really surprising, therefore, that it's these areas where all those children, unfortunately, are dying before they reach 1 year old? So again, we can start to see how there might be links between these different measures. Okay, next statistic, next measure, get this definition down, the literacy rate. This is a measure of the percentage of adults who can read and write. Now, sometimes we see literacy rates expressed as male or female literacy rates, because often there's a discrepancy between the two, especially in developing countries, or in some cultures and some areas of the world. Male children are preferred over female in terms of who they might send to school, and what sort of roles might they be expected to play when they grow up into adults. We're only going to be interested in this instance on general literacy rates, but we might have time in the lesson to look at the difference between male and female. But again, this is showing us really basic stuff to do with schools. I mean, literacy is the thing that we hope in British schools you get by the time you kind of reach 4, 5, 6 years old. But these are places in the world where less than half the adult population can read or write. What does that tell you about the government in that country? What does it tell you about the wealth of the country, the quality of schools? So write a couple of comments about that. Next slide then for you to make some notes on is access to safe water. And again, hopefully you're starting to see the links between the countries which are coming up time and time again here. Percentage of population without a sustainable access to an improved water source. So in other words, not just a puddle in the ground, but one that maybe has been cleaned or filtered or made safe in some way. And again, we can see the sorts of parts of the world where there simply are lots of people that do not have access to safe water. Mainly these countries in sub-Saharan Africa again, India, China, North Korea, Mexico, whereas Western Europe and America, Australia, etc., everyone, virtually everyone. Coming to near the end now, life expectancy is the next slide for you to make some notes on. The definition is the expected number of years of life remaining at any given age. This map down here is showing life expectancy at birth, but you have age-specific life expectancies. But we can see here where people are, how long people are expected to live. And again, it's not surprising that countries of Western Europe, Eastern Europe, North America, parts of South America, parts of the Middle East and North Africa and Australia have very high life expectancies, 70 plus years at birth, whereas there are vast areas of our planet where when you were born you were not expected to live beyond 40, 50 years of age, and some areas less than 40 years old. Now, that didn't happen in Europe since the Middle Ages, more or less. So this is where basic standards of living, quality of life is so poor that people aren't expected to live beyond 40 or 50 years old. Okay, final thing that we're going to have a look at today is something called the Human Development Index. And as it says here, this is not a single measure like all those other measures. This is a measure of development which actually combines three different things: life expectancy, education and income. And it combines those three figures and it gives a number for every country between 0 and 1. If you are the best country in the world at each of these three things, then you have a score of 1. If you're the worst country in the world of each of these three things, you get a score of 0. But every country gets ranked between 0 and 1. The statistics it actually uses was changed 2 years ago. This is the up-to-date measure here. Firstly, it looks at life expectancy at birth. These economists and geographers believe is a really good measure of what it means to be developed, that you live a long and healthy life. Secondly, it looks at education. It used to look at literacy rates, but these days it looks at the average number of years that people are at school, the reality. Now in Britain that will be at the moment roughly around 16, 17 years for most people, or actually probably less than that because you don't start school until you're 3 or 4. But that would be the average. But then it says expected years of schooling, because it's known that the government might expect one thing, but the reality might be something different. And that's worked out for every country. And then it looks at the wealth of the country, and they plumped for gross national income per person, per capita. And it's got this little figure here, which is purchasing power parity. It's just a way of changing the figures to mean that if a country has actually quite a low GNI per capita, yet it doesn't actually cost that much to buy things, then it bumps that figure up to take into account that. So in your table, just write out the three measures it uses and what they all relate to. And this is our pattern, which hopefully takes into or has many similarities with a lot of those measures we've been looking at.
Is HDI the best index for measuring development? Human development is about enlarging people's choices and enabling them to live long, healthy and creative lives. It is much more than the rise of national income. It is about fighting poverty and living with dignity. The goal is human freedom. The Human Development Index, HDI, is a way of measuring development of a country. It is a summary composite index that measures a country's average achievements in three basic aspects of human development: health, knowledge, and income. It is measured on a scale from 0 to 1. It was first developed by the late Pakistani economist Mahbub-ul-Haq with the collaboration of the Nobel laureate Amartya Sen and other leading development thinkers for the first Human Development Report in 1990. It was introduced as an alternative to conventional measures of national development, such as level of income and the rate of economic growth, as a more precise and balanced method of measuring a country's development. Measuring a country's development using economic methods, such as GNP, is concentrated on something rather alienated from human life. Commodity is good, and not people, their lives and freedom.
To tell the story of development in terms of how people are faring, not just how production is doing. I think one of the central points that Human Development Report makes is that it's not the level of income that matters, it is the use that is made of that income. Same income can be used for essential medicines, can also be used for narcotics. It can be used for military equipment and tanks. It can also be used for road construction.
The UN prefer to use HDI rather than one single indicator, as it gives a much more broader and balanced way of showing a country's development. HDI is a much better measure than GNP, gross national product, or GNI, gross national income. A country's GNP may be high, but there might be a lot of inequality in the country. For example, that women get less education than men, if any, or the country might be split by only a few rich people, but the majority of the population is poor. The Human Development Report takes many averages of a country's health, education, and income, which show a country's development in a better and more precise way. For example, Vietnam and Pakistan both have a similar GDP per capita. However, life expectancy and literacy are considerably higher in Vietnam than they are in Pakistan. If we measured the country's development only by GDP, then we would think they are both equally developed. But actually, they are not, and this is what the Human Development Report will show. Also, Saudi Arabia has a GDP per capita similar to that of Croatia. However, in Saudi Arabia, there is greater inequality between men and women when considering access to education and political power. So, although they are equal on an economic development index, Saudi Arabia is less developed on a human development index. This is why the UN prefers to use HDI rather than one single indicator. You can see a table showing different countries' HDIs. North America, Australia and parts of Europe have HDIs of 0.95 and over. Africa as a continent has one of the lowest HDIs. Places such as Sierra Leone have the lowest HDIs around 0.35. You now see a table showing the world's highest HDI ranked countries, with Norway being at the top with an HDI of 0.938, and then countries such as the United States, the Netherlands, Germany following, and then with Barbados being at number 42 with an HDI of 0.788. The UK's HDI in 2010 was 0.849. The UK is 26th out of 169 countries with comparable data. The HDI of OECD as a region increased from 0.723 in 1980 to 0.53 today, placing United Kingdom below the regional average. Spain's HDI in 2010 was 0.863. Spain's rank is 20th out of 169 countries with comparable data. Malaysia's HDI in 2010 was 0.744. Malaysia's rank is 57th out of 169 countries. The HDI of East Asia and the Pacific as a region increased from 0.391 in 1980 to 0.65 today, placing Malaysia above the regional average. Rwanda's HDI in 2010 was 0.385. Rwanda's rank is 152nd out of 169 countries. The HDI of Sub-Saharan Africa as a region increased from 0.293 in 1980 to 0.389 today, placing Rwanda just below the regional average. Bhutan's HDI was 0.619 in 2009. Bhutan's rank is 132nd out of 169 countries. You can see from the Gapminder graph that as the country's GDP increases, so does its HDI. This shows that GDP is a significant part of the Human Development Index. This, I think, is one of the biggest faults of the Human Development Report. GDP is taken as 1/3 of the country's HDI, showing that still GDP is one of the main measurements that a country's development is measured by. From this mind map, you can see some of the development indicators, including economic activity, healthcare, which is calories per person per day, death-birth ratio, life expectancy, ratio of doctors per person, electricity consumption, water access, and many others. Another development index is the Physical Quality of Life Index, PQLI. The PQLI is an attempt to measure the quality of life or well-being of a country. The value is the average of three statistics: basic literacy rate, infant mortality, and life expectancy at age 1, all equally weighed on a scale from 0 to 100. PQLI was developed for the Overseas Development Council in the mid-1970s by David Morris as one of a number of measures created due to dissatisfaction with the use of GNP as an indicator of development. PQLI might be regarded as an improvement, but shares the general problems of measuring quality of life in a quantitative way. It has also been criticized because there is a considerable overlap between infant mortality and life expectancy. I like PQLI as an indicator of development for the reason that it does not use GNP as a major factor, and I believe that a country's development should not just depend on its GNP, but also on how the people are living. The UN Human Development Index is a more widely used means of measuring well-being. UK's PQLI is 97, whereas Spain's PQLI is 92, making Spain the 28th out of 164 countries. Spain has a higher HDI than the UK, but the UK has a higher PQLI. This means that the UK probably has a higher life expectancy, less infant mortality, and a higher literacy rate, giving the UK a higher PQLI. Malaysia's PQLI was 83 in 1992. Sadly, there are no up-to-date statistics. Rwanda's PQLI was 48 in 92. Again, there were no up-to-date statistics. Overall, I think PQLI is a good index of development, but I believe it doesn't include some of the major development indicators into its national measurements. Happiness, GNH, is an indicator which was developed in Bhutan in the Himalayas, based on the concept elaborated in 1972. Since then, the Kingdom of Bhutan, with the support of the UN Development Programme, began to put this concept into practice and has attracted the attention of the rest of the world with its new formula to measure the progress of a community or nation. GNH is based on the principle that the calculation of wealth should consider other aspects besides economic development. For example, the preservation of the environment and the quality of life of the people. The goal of a society should be the integration of material development with psychological, cultural, and spiritual aspects, all in harmony with the earth. The four main points of GNH are the promotion of equitable and sustainable socio-economic development, the preservation and promotion of cultural values, the conservation of the natural environment, and the establishment of good governance.
To us, gross national happiness basically means that ultimately the long-term and the ultimate goal of development should be happiness, that the people should be happy. And Bhutan believes that this happiness cannot come from purely material development, economic development, but that it must be very carefully balanced with spiritual health, with the environment, and generally the quality of life.
The 9 dimensions of GNH are psychological well-being, health, use of time, community vitality, education, culture, environment, governance, and standard of living. I think that GNH is a better measure of development than HDI because not all happiness comes from money. I like the concept of GNH as it cares about the people and their environment and not so much about the wealth of the country. HDI takes into account the country's GNP, which other people in Europe and the world take as an important factor. The population in Bhutan don't care so much about money, as they live in a place where they don't need money to be happy. In Bhutan, there is psychological well-being, good health, good use of time, communities, all right education, old culture, a green non-polluted environment, good governments, the king cares about the happiness of his people, and a good standard of living. The people of Bhutan are happy, and that I think is the main measure of development. What use is a developed country where people are unhappy? Countries with high GNPs have lots of people who are unhappy. The wealth is split between classes, and many people are poor and are struggling to continue life. In Bhutan, people are poor by our standards, but they don't need the wealth, as they are well cared for. They have an all-right standard of living, they have education and good health, and they're happy with their lives. Mainly, I think GNH is better than HDI, but I think HDI takes in some important information, which GNH doesn't. I think that infant mortality rate is an important factor of a country's development. If many babies are dying before the age of 1, I think this shows that a country needs to develop its health services more and quickly. In Bhutan, there is a high infant mortality rate. There are 52.4 deaths in every 1,000 live births. On the HDI ranking, Bhutan is quite low down. It is ranked 132nd out of 169. But on the GNH scale, they are the highest, as all their population is happy. Bhutan's low GNP, high infant mortality rate, and low life expectancy bring it down in the ranking of the HDI. But we must remember that some people in Bhutan will live to 80 and maybe over. Everything done is for the people in Bhutan, and I cannot say the same for countries like the United Kingdom. Therefore, overall, I think that GNH is a better way of measuring development, as I think that development is all about improving the conditions that people live in and their happiness, not how much they earn. Also, I think the amount of forests and care for the environment is an important development factor, which the GNH takes into account, but HDI doesn't. Therefore, GNH is a better way of measuring development. Thank you for watching. I hope you have learnt a lot about the different development indexes.
Do you know what it feels like loving someone that's in a rush to throw you away? Do you know what it feels like to be the last one to know the lock on the door has changed?
Well, this is the key idea, in other words, what the exam board wants us to make sure that we're focusing on. And really, we're going to be looking at what development is, contrast and development, and then we're going to be thinking about how we can divide the world up in a whole range of different ways. What I'm hopefully going to try and explain to you, and I want you to kind of build up an understanding of, is that development is not a single thing. It's not a single track which every country must go down the same track and creating identikit countries. Actually, countries can develop in lots of different ways. Lots of different people can define development in lots of different ways. And we need to perhaps avoid simplistic measures and simplistic ways of categorizing the world, because that often ignores the complexity and the multiplicity of development ideals. So this is what the exam specification says that we need to make sure that we cover, and that you need to be able to discuss at length in your exams. And we're going to kind of be doing it in this order. In fact, the bottom two bullet points down here, we're going to be discussing more in our next lesson. But the work you're going to be doing in this video is going to be associated with these top two bullet points. We're going to be thinking about different ways of classifying the world. And then we're going to be going through how we can actually measure development. We're going to be learning about all these different measures as they're written here. You're going to be defining them. We're going to be looking at the patterns associated with them, so that you can, as I said, talk about them at length in your exams. So the first task that you're going to be working through over the next few minutes is as follows. What I'd like you to do is put a title at the top of a new page in your book, Categorizing the World's Development, and then write out the headings for this table. It's going to have 5 rows, but you're probably best off working a row at a time, and only once you get to the next slide draw out the next row, so you don't know how long each row is going to be. Pause the video now whilst you write out that table, and then press play when you're ready to proceed. Okay, over the next 5 slides we're going to have a look at a different range of ways of trying to divide up the world, really, in terms of development. Some of the times these methods are quite simplistic, other times they're based on certain data and not other data, but they should be quite familiar to you. The first row of your table is going to be this first measure, the north versus the south. We often hear when we're thinking about development, we often have an approach which is a kind of them and us approach. You know, we are firmly in Britain in the so-called north, a line which roughly, as I said, splits the world into what we often refer to as the developed north and the undeveloped or less developed south. And it's an easy approach to try to conceptualize. It easily splits the world into 2 areas, but as we're going to see, there are lots of countries that we probably think of as developed that probably aren't included in this diagram. For example, you might have already spotted Australia, New Zealand down here, Japan, certainly the upcoming economies of China, India, Brazil, South Africa. These are countries which are probably as developed, if not more developed, than many of the countries in Eastern Europe, for example, or Central Asia. But yet this simplistic divide between the north and the south is perhaps a bit too simplistic. Perhaps it ignores the variations within the north and the variations within the south. So on your table, just write out what the general pattern is, but then just a couple of sentences perhaps describing the limitations of this simplistic divide. Okay, well, as I hinted at the last on the last slide, when we talk about the north and the south, we're often talking about development. When we talk about development, as we're going to see later on, what a lot of people boil it down to is the wealth of the country. And as we're going to see later, one way of measuring wealth is by something called the GDP, which stands for the gross domestic product, which is a measure of how much goods and services are bought and sold within a country. Actually, if we were splitting the world into two areas, those with a higher than average GDP and those with a lower than average GDP, we can see that this north-south divide that we saw in the last slide doesn't quite match what the reality is. And in fact, there's lots of countries that we would classify being in the south, perhaps parts of South America, even parts of Africa, certainly parts of Oceania and Southeast Asia, which are as rich, if not richer, than countries in the north. And similarly, there are countries in the north which, again, aren't as rich as some countries in the south. So we have here still a twofold categorization, a twofold division. Perhaps this, maybe, though, is a bit more accurate than the previous slide. But again, some of the issues are, what are the variations between the high countries and the variations between the low countries? Can we really divide up the world into two areas? And again, copy out the next row on your table with the pattern that's shown here, maybe some examples of countries that don't fit the pattern, and your thoughts on that. Now, another common and maybe slightly outdated, but well, certainly slightly outdated, we'll have a think about it, but a common way of splitting the world into more than two categories is to use the terms first, second and third world. Now, you're probably more familiar with first and third world countries in terms of their names, their terms, because perhaps you read about it in newspapers, hear about it in the news, and talking to people, often referring to less developed countries, those in South America, Africa, Southeast Asia, as third world countries. And certainly these are the countries referred to in green as are the third world countries. And again, it's pretty common to refer to America and Europe as first world countries. But what are second world countries? Well, hopefully you might have spotted on this map that one of the ways in which these three terms were defined was to define the capitalist countries of the world, those with a strong capitalist economy, this is back in the 1950s, 1960s, as first world countries. Now that also included parts of their empires. So for example, Britain, because it had links with parts of South Africa, parts of the Middle East, etc., and Southeast Asia, many of those countries, they would be referred to as first world countries as well. Third world countries are those that still had a non-developed economy, but the second world countries are those that were based on communist or socialist ideals. So that included the USSR, China, parts of East Africa, and the Russian controlled or dominated areas of Eastern Europe and Cuba. So really this was to do with the way their economies were based, but we still use these terms today. But clearly one of the issues with this is that it's very much not appropriate today. There are very few, if any, true socialist or communist countries remaining. Probably the only two maybe are Cuba over here and North Korea. Even China has changed its economy considerably just in the last 10-15 years or so, and many of the so-called third world countries have changed considerably and are very much modern capitalist economy. So again, fill in that column, define what first second and third world are, and some of the problems associated with this definition.
Ghana is doing very well, and it's one country that I believe will attain the Millennium Development Goal.
Ghanaian agriculture has improved tremendously. I mean, there's still a long way to go.
"30 years ago, Ghana's economy was on the verge of collapse. Today, this West African country is on course to become the first in Africa to achieve Millennium Development Goal number 1, to halve its poverty and hunger. What has driven this remarkable economic success story? In a word, agriculture. Ghana is ranked among the top 5 countries in the world for its agricultural growth, which has averaged more than 5% a year during the last 25 years. At independence in 1957, Ghana had a bright future. Rich in land, timber and gold, it was also the world's leading cocoa producer. By the 1970s, turbulent politics began to throw the economy into decline.
I lived in Ghana from 1975 to 78. I mean, those were very difficult years. It was difficult to have a full meal.
And by 1983, cocoa production, hit with enormous taxes, had dropped by 60%. Following economic reforms in 1983, Ghana's currency was devalued and the Cocoa Marketing Board was restructured. Staff cuts, privatised distribution and introducing competition to internal markets ensured that cocoa producers' prices continued to rise steadily.
The government of Ghana decided that it will both invest and help the farmers in the cocoa sector to improve productivity and improve their incomes. And because of that, cocoa farmers, they are better off than before.
It was not just the cocoa growers who reaped the benefits. The cocoa boom also stimulated growth of the rest of the rural economy. Cassava production has increased by over 7.2% a year during the last 25 years. This staggering growth is largely due to the adoption of new varieties of cassava that are resistant to disease and require low inputs. The great news about booming agriculture in Ghana is that more food and improved rural incomes have reduced hunger.
Today, you can see that things have changed for the better. You can see that people are eating better, they are living better, people are much more active in the economy.
Food supply has grown faster than the population, and the real price of food has declined. More food, better healthcare for women and children, and improved sanitation have played a part in the reduction of child malnutrition. The proportion of underweight infants has fallen from 30% in 1988 to 17% in 2008. Further challenges lie ahead for Ghana. More efficient farming techniques will be essential for the success to continue. And another key challenge will be to balance the agricultural boom with the imperative of protecting the environment. But Ghana has undeniably made significant progress in development.
Africa is gradually getting into a situation where we should take our part alongside other reformers. The tigers of Southeast Asia, the dragon of China and Brazil. A number of African countries have a lot to emulate from Ghana.
When you try your best but you don't succeed, when you get what you want but not what you need, when you feel so tired but you can't sleep, stuck in rivers, and the tears come streaming down your face, when you lose something you can't replace, when you love someone, but it goes to waste. Could it be worse? Lights will guide you home and ignite your bones, and I will try to fix you. High up above or down below, when you're too in love to let it go. But if you never try, you'll never know just what you were. Lights will guide you home and ignite your bones, and I will try to fix you. Tears stream down your face when you lose something you cannot replace. Tears stream down your face Tears stream down your face. I promise you I'll learn from my mistakes. Tears stream down your face. Lights will guide you home and ignite your bones.
We think that we've had aid for some time. We are not saying that aid money is no good money. I mean, there's nothing like bad money. But then aid has its own problems. One, it's very difficult to predict when you can get the money. And I always cite the example of Dr. Kabuka, the current head of ADB, who was the finance minister in Rwanda. He said that in a particular year, I've forgotten the year, but he was waiting for some money which came on the 28th of December that year, after Christmas. There was money he was waiting for his budget for that year. The money has come in December. What do you do with it? So you then have to plan for it the following year. But there is something which I have done 1 year ago. So it's erratic. You're not too sure whether, apart from the fact that it is erratic, the donor will tell you what you have to do with the money, so that you don't have the opportunity to spend the money in critical areas that would generate much more revenue for your country. So we should find ways of weaning ourselves away from it gradually. And we are not saying that's going to happen tomorrow. But then once we are saying that, look, we would want to find a way of weaning ourselves from it gradually, it will take some time. But then if we get extra, especially for those of us who have to import oil, it's very, very difficult. Because whatever little money we get, go buy petrol, the dollar is fluctuating almost every day. So aid money, yes. But then if I know that my budget is 10 and I'm making 10, and the extras I can probably lavish that one on something else. So for us, revenue mobilization is very, very important. And we hope that after this we'll be able to find much more creative ways of raising much more revenue for our countries, and then begin to stop depending on donors. I'm sure they are tired.
'Twas the night before Christmas, and all around the world, presents were wrapped and ribbons were curled. Parcels and packages stacked under trees, to be opened, explored, enthused over, and promptly forgotten. What if this year you gave something useful? Who likes aromatherapy? Handkerchiefs? Not for me! A pot plant under the Christmas tree. Not me. Or me? Say, what's the use of a singing fish? A stinky candle? A hate-proof dish? Make someone special Christmas wish and buy me. Buy me! Buy me! Buy me! We all get the same old box of chocks, soap on a rope and grandpa socks. Put something new in your Christmas stocks and buy... or me. No, me! Don't buy crap this Christmas. Buy me. Buy me! Buy me! Buy me! Don't buy crap this Christmas. Buy me. Buy me! Buy me! Buy me! Don't head out on a shopping spree. Then dump it under the Christmas tree. Buy me. Buy me. Buy me! Buy me! It's all about me. Me. Buy us.
There are some places around the world you might not think of as needing computers. Africa, for example, might need water, food or medicines first. Most classrooms need more books, but books alone won't enable these Kenyan children to play their full part in the modern world. The continent has some fine doctors, but they're mainly in the cities, far away from where most of the population live. And if you're disabled and living in a developing country, there are precious few organisations that can really help. To solve these problems, we don't need lots of cash. In fact, it hardly need cost us anything at all, if you'd like to help. At this Kenyan secondary school, these Maasai teenagers learn the ways of their ancestors, but that doesn't mean they have to live in the past. Like hundreds of other schools, Kilgora Secondary couldn't afford computers, but now pupils here are getting the skills needed to join Africa's new workforce. Provided by Computer Aid, these PCs are the envy of schools for 100 miles around.
In terms of employment, it has also improved a lot, since after you finished high school with the knowledge of computer, it's easier to get a job outside there.
Leaving Nairobi, and suddenly you're in the middle of nowhere, high above the plains of East Africa. 3/4 of Africans live in rural areas. Getting medical care to them can be tricky if the specialist who can help is 300 miles away. Dr. Sadie and his team look after 260 patients a day, treating almost every ailment. Today he's checking up on Mohammed, who's broken his leg, but the fracture is in an unusual place, one he's not seen before. Even a highly skilled doctor can't be expected to know everything. so once a week or in an emergency, he sends pictures and x-rays to the top specialists in the country using a laptop, scanner and digital camera, all provided by Computer Aid. Rather than guess what might be the next step, Dr. Sadie can tap into a network of expertise and have a greater chance of getting a correct diagnosis to give his patient the best chance of recovery. Another mystery. What looked like an uncomfortable blockage turns out to be a potentially fatal complication. Doctors at Mkindu knew something was seriously wrong, but urgently needed an expert opinion. When it comes, it's bad news. Left untreated, the intestine will burst within a few days, killing the patient. But crucially, Dr. Sadie is also told how he can rescue the situation.
In this particular case, it's actually like solve the problem. It's like it's the one which made the diagnosis for me. It did like 90% of the job because because of the communication. Like in many other cases, it's like the critical point. You're stuck, what do you do? You're far from the city, you're far from the good facilities, what do you do? So this was my link. This was my lifeline for the patient.
Sadly, many countries don't have the means to provide their rural doctors with telemedicine computing. Fortunately, Mkindu Hospital is supported by Computer Aid, and that support isn't just saving lives. 50% more people here volunteer for HIV tests. Now results can be emailed and the postal costs paid for by the patients are reduced. Ordering online has cut drug delivery times from 28 days to just 4. Another answer for Dr. Sadie. The immediacy of the computer link makes all the doctors working at Mkindu feel a lot less remote. Blindness affects a high proportion of the population in Africa. A few, like Joseph, find a way to make a living, but many get no help and are sidelined by society. But Computer Aid wants its PCs to be usable by all. So working alongside local experts, it funds adaptive technologies, giving the visually impaired, like Lewis here, new opportunities to continue her education right through to university.
So I don't now use anyone to help me write it out, but I do type my assignment.
Lewis can hear what she's writing, and Martin can use what little sight he does have to see and explore the internet. It's hard to overestimate the impact of these projects in countries with few discrimination laws and little help from the state.
We cannot afford new computers to place in their hands, definitely. And this is a major step forward for us. Over the few years we've been working with Computer Aid, the partnership began from provision of equipment. Today we've moved beyond provision of equipment, computer hardware, to now looking at cost-effective mechanisms to enable people access.
The success of these projects goes beyond learning.
Welcome to Safaricom Customer Care. Lilian speaking. How may I help you?
Safaricom is the biggest company in East Africa. It's now offering full-time employment to the visually impaired. It's a massive step forward, and one that would have been unlikely to have happened without the adaptive technologies supplied by Computer Aid and its partners.
With the training that they have been provided and the tools that we have, they are able to perform just like anyone else.
Welcome to Aid or Trade, a series in which development aid and sustainable business come together. The main principle is aid is no longer a matter of transferring money or shipping goods. It is increasingly becoming a question of setting up sustainable businesses to tackle problems. Today, we visit sustainable business initiatives in Liberia, Malawi, Ghana, and Kenya. People often associate the mass production of t-shirts and trousers with Asia, but two entrepreneurs in Monrovia have set up a new center for the clothing industry. In the capital of Liberia, women who are scared by the war are being trained to make t-shirts and to run a successful factory.
Especially in Liberia, when you are not doing anything, you are
not respected. When the Civil War ended in 2003, after 14 years of conflict, it was mainly the women who had difficulty finding jobs. When Liberian entrepreneur Chid Liberty returned from America in 2008, he and his business partner saw an opportunity for women to manufacture clothing.
The idea came about when I was reading a book by Jeff Sachs called The End of Poverty, and he was talking about the opportunity that working in the garment field had provided for women all over Southeast Asia as sort of the first rung on the ladder out of poverty.
Using funds from American social investors, Chid set up the company Liberty and Justice. He also began the NGO Made in Liberia to train new staff. The company funded most of the foundation's activities. Chid deliberately chose this business approach.
No country in the history of the world has ever lifted itself out of poverty through donor funding. It's never happened.
In Monrovia, the Liberty and Justice factory employs around 60 women who work the 40 sewing machines full-time. Before they start, the ladies are given 3 months of training, which is organized by Made in Liberia. Here, they are prepared for working from 9 till 5 in the factory.
And this is what we are making. I say we because it is a t-shirt and factory where one person doesn't do it. Another person hemming the street, another person facing the shoulders.
Just like anywhere else, the wages are a matter for discussion.
Yes, I'm earning enough money, but I put board because I'm hoping for additional.
The organic cotton for the t-shirts comes from Burkina Faso, Senegal, and Mali, and is treated in Morocco before it arrives in Liberia. In addition, the Liberty and Justice Workshop is the first in Africa to receive a fair trade certificate. The company mainly exports to the U.S. market, where the demand for fair trade products made under good working conditions is growing.
Our real objective is to transform the apparel industry from an industry that's just known for worker exploitation and environmental degradation towards partnership and sustainability.
Plenty of ambition. Soon, the factory is going to move to a bigger location in Monrovia, where around 1,000 women will be employed in a year and a half's time. In Liberia, a woman with a job is respected.
I'm a working woman now. I'm proud.
Now we leave Liberia in West Africa to Malawi in East Africa, where wild animals and villagers live in harmony. Here, a wildlife reserve, which has undergone a complete overhaul by the African Parks Network, provides an opportunity for both man and beast. This is Majete Wildlife Park, where tourists can spot rhinos, antelopes, and elephants.
Mphamvu za Majete ndi zimene zatipangisa kutiphunzitsa ntchito mwachatsopano komanso kutipezeranso misika. Ndi apa tikungoyamikira kuti pamene tili kuno.
A lot has changed in a couple of years. The Majete Wildlife Reserve, spreading over 700 square kilometers, has been neglected for decades, until African Parks took over management of the park and started running the reserve like a genuine business. The organization, which works together with local authorities and entrepreneurs, brought thousands of animals into the area and built a 250-kilometer road. Before that, there were hardly any tourists, but now more than 4,000 tourists come every year. A real boost to the local economy.
Ndi anthu aja akamabwera alendo aja ndikuona kuti akumasiya kenakake. Sono kenakake kamene akukasiya ku office kwathuko ndi mbali imodzi ona kuti anthu omwe akumatenga kandalama kameneko ndi kumathandizira ana skulu amene panopa ali amasiye.
The essential thing is that local residents are involved in decision-making concerning the park.
What we are trying to tap from the community is the indigenous technical knowledge that they have, because they are living with wildlife in harmony.
We've invested in wildlife, translocations. We have invested in infrastructure. We have invested in people, and I'm sure this is the way to go.
Around 130,000 people live outside the park's fences in 85 villages. The park was their source of livelihood. They used to get their wood and mushrooms and even shot wild animals for food inside the park. But this is no longer allowed. They can still make a living from the park anyway, as a ranger or as a tour guide. They can also make baskets or furniture with wood from the park. African Parks trains and supervises 50 craftsmen.
What we encourage them is to add value to their products, okay, make them look nice.
Phindu limene ndili nalo la misika imene nimagulitsa wa kumidzi ndi wa kumajeti nimapeza profit kwambiri ndi kumajeti fuka kunoko misika yake imakhala yotsikirako ya kumajeti imakhala yokwererako.
People are not allowed to just take what they need from the park. Palm fronds, for instance, are not to be cut from the palm trees, but should only be taken when it falls on the ground. The villagers now understand what sustainability means and how beautiful their back garden has become.
Mwaiji munganda nkwanzo unayakuti timakaziona timaona nyama zina zote sangalasa ife oneka ngati zimenezo ndi zinthu zoti ife anthu tilengedwe kusangana nazo.
We move from Malawi's nature to the bustling Ghanaian capital, Accra. Telecom companies seem to thrive here. The booming telecom sector gives many young entrepreneurs the opportunity to start up their own internet or software company.
I want to own my business where I know I'm solving real-world issues. I'm doing something meaningful.
Every company starts with a good idea, as the founders of Nandi Mobile have found out. Nandi Mobile, a young business set up by 3 software students, developed a system that people could contact the customer services of large companies by text message. Not a bad idea in a country where there are more mobile phones than computers.
There are other customer support applications, but we provide a cheaper medium, which is SMS, and more universal medium than internet. They can analyze the message. They can know how many customers complain about a particular service.
Nandi Mobile is one of the successful companies set up by students from MEST, the Meltwater Entrepreneurial School of Technology. The Norwegian software company Meltwater wants to stimulate the Ghanaian technology sector. The school selects ambitious students and teaches them software programming, bookkeeping, and business in 2 years.
So the MEST program is broken into 3 phases. The first phase being the training phase, which is a 2-year program. The second phase being incubation, where we support the teams in getting started with their companies. And the third phase being mentorship, where we support them after they leave the incubator. What is interesting about Ghana is that there's a lot of entrepreneurial people who have the entrepreneurial instincts and entrepreneurial drive to start something themselves.
I already had the basis of programming, but I improved on it in MEST. And business wasn't something I knew much about.
Young entrepreneurs with a good idea can get a basic investment of around $30,000 to $500,000 from MEST. Because without money, you cannot start a business. The software developed at MEST has to be able to compete with software from abroad.
The quality of software can be developed here is just as high as anywhere else. And the good thing about software is it can be delivered via the internet or via mobile devices, so you can sit in Ghana and provide services to companies in the US or in the UK with no problem.
After delivering a successful pitch at the launch of a conference in San Francisco, the founders of Nandi Mobile received the Best Business Award. This encouragement prize for starting technology companies has drawn attention to the Ghanaian company. Nandi Mobile is concentrating on text message services at the moment. But since recently, there's been something new in the air.
As the use of mobile internet becomes higher, we plan to move to the WAP version.
We can use software to solve the corruption issue, the electricity going on and off every time, the water issue. We can use software to do agriculture, change the face of the nation, and even change our lives.
From high-tech in Ghana, we go to a low-tech solution in Kenya. A couple of years ago, farmers here had difficulty surviving until they were retrained and bought beehives with a loan. This is the poor Siaya district in southwest Kenya, where hundreds of farmers are now making a living from the insect, which used to be a nuisance.
Kichi cho daga ko dikan to ka ka ginyala ko minga to chiemo nyocha gi to to dala kane to angena ngene mago gin adui
obiro mopogore mar oduma samoro ne kinyal ngeni no pesa di oduma nya no ngeni no.
The beekeepers, around 10,000 already in the whole of Kenya, work with Honey Care Africa, a commercial organization which helps people run sustainable businesses. The farmers buy the equipment from Honey Care, such as a whole Langstroth beehive. To do so, they get a loan from a third party, the Equity Bank.
Instead of relying on traditional in this area, they've been working mainly with maize. And we thought maybe if we could introduce other activities that could diversify their incomes.
If you look at most microfinance institutions, they really don't take risk to support beekeeping enterprises because it's like a high-risk venture, considering that you depend on the weather pattern.
Honey Care guarantees it will buy the honey. Part of the profit goes back to the bank as repayment. A win-win situation, says everyone involved.
We don't recommend donations and grants to the farmers because for a project to be sustainable, they have to have a sense of ownership. Because if you give free things to people, then they don't care about it.
Loan taseyudo kum Equity, kichintie sanduk marachiel manaseyudo, manomiya, to tie moko mabe asenyiewo awuon kenda.
You need to do more than just provide beehives. You also have to change people's behavior and teach them new things. That is the Honey Care approach. The farmers are trained how to run a business and what to watch out for. And the new beekeepers learn quickly.
The
honey has been harvested, the farmers have been paid, but that is not the end of it. The honey still has to be processed and sold, and eaten, of course. People who like to eat honey pay 250 shillings per jar in the supermarket. Farmers need to get used to that. They receive just 170 shillings per kilo, but the honey business has its advantages.
Bees are not fed. They would get the nectar from the plants, which is just free. Then the farmer only needs 2 hours per month to check his hive. If you translate it into 2 working days, it's quite a lot of money.
Atime seche duto.
word of the day, where I break down a financial term or concept for our very smart viewer, but just perhaps not, you know, the financial expert, the John Perkins in the crowd. So we've been talking a lot about this one with John Perkins because we've been talking about corporate interests. So I want to break down what is a multinational corporation, because that's really a lot of who we're talking about. So let's look at exactly what this means. But first, let's look at another way this is being used today. So we got this from an op-ed that appeared on CTV, which is the Canadian News Network. This is actually from an Occupy protester, and this is what they wrote in their op-ed, if we could bring that up. For too long, citizens have been content to follow where government and multinational corporations lead. The profit motive has become immune to attack. It is understood that as long as something is profitable for shareholders, nothing else matters enough. So what exactly makes a company then a multinational corporation? Let's bring up the definition. It's a corporation, of course, obviously, that has its facilities and other assets in at least one country other than its home country. Very large multinationals, too, have budgets that exceed those of many small countries, to give you a sense of their power and their reach. Now, some of the largest, what are they? Let me give you examples. There are companies that are household names: ExxonMobil, Nestle, IBM, Royal Dutch Shell, Microsoft, Walmart, BP, Chevron, General Electric, Citigroup, Monsanto. The list goes on. They're behind me, and the reason they're spinning around on a globe like this is because, according to someone like our guest, economist and author John Perkins, multinational corporations know no national boundaries, they don't follow any specific sets of laws, and they have a lot of cash. So they have a lot of influence in politics and in policy. So this influence explains why, for example, U.S. military motivations may be called into question when you hear someone like, say, Senator John McCain, say something like this. It was back in September on a visit of congressional leaders to Libya in the midst of the NATO mission. Take a listen.
American investors are more than eager to come and invest here in Libya. And we hope that and believe that they will be given an opportunity to do so. And it's pretty clear that as long as fighting is going on, it'll be more difficult to attract that investment.
So when we're talking about investors and attracting that kind of investment, a multinational corporation would be a really good example of the kind of investor who may be looking to cash in.
At like the age of 18, I was just on the track. Go to a good college, get a decent degree, do good. You're going to get an entry-level job down on Wall Street. You're going to work real hard. You're going to be a broker. You're going to make tons of money. You're going to be retired by a very young age. You're going to have a house on the beach in New Jersey and a couple Mercedes and a trophy wife, and that'll be the end of the game. I'm done. Multi-millionaire. That's it. I was playing professionally for the New Jersey Imperials. I was playing the best soccer of my life. I get offered this coaching job by one of my teammates to go coach at St. John's University, the NCAA Division I national champions. They're the best team in the country. I was having a blast. I was loving coaching. I was loving playing. I'm living in New York. I'm also studying stuff that I really enjoy. I'm digging into like studying theology for the first time in my life in a formal way. I get online, I start doing searches about Nike and sweatshops and labor practices. And what I found was if you wanted to pick a company that completely violates everything that Catholic social teaching is about, Nike would be your perfect case study. And at the same time I'm doing this research, St. John's University Athletic Department starts to negotiate a $3.5 million endorsement deal with Nike that would require me as a coach to wear and promote the products. St. John's University got the largest Catholic institution in the country, coupling itself with the largest sportswear company in the world. And I said, how can we, as such a public symbol of Catholicism, do something that runs completely counter to our mission? Like we're saying to the world then, look, you should care about the poor, and we should fight against injustice, and we should seek out the causes of poverty. Well, unless you're getting like some really good athletic equipment and $3.5 million along with it. I mean, you want to talk about just hypocrisy manifested in the real world. Like, this was it.
And you have the story at St. John's.
Jim Keedy has caused a massive pileup.
He is
clearly an idealist.
I didn't go to St. John's University to work for Nike. I went there to coach and to study theology.
Keedy, a devout Catholic, protested.
How does he reach the point where he thinks it's immoral to wear the swoop?
Because he's coming at it from a background of faith and religion. This isn't about just money or power or job or anything. Think about this. How many of us on a job that we really want are prepared to get a memo from the boss saying, stop doing this or you're out, and you keep doing it?
I was given an ultimatum by my head coach: wear Nike and drop this issue or resign. End of story. So in June of 1998, I was constructively fired. People were telling me, you don't know what you're talking about. You know, those are great jobs, and you can live like a king or a queen on those wages, and those people are really happy to have those jobs. I want to go find out. Doesn't everybody just want to know the truth? So I wanted to know the truth firsthand. I wanted to see it, I wanted to smell it, I wanted to hold it in my hand. I knew I was going to need other people. Leslie was a natural match.
Jim and I went to college together. We came together ultimately because we share an interest in labor rights issues.
I eventually met back up with her a few years after school through an email about sweatshops.
I really wanted to be working with these issues.
And I wrote to my buddy and said, you know, who's this woman that's writing to you about this stuff? And he said, oh, she's nuts like you know, you should email her. And she was actually en route to go work with Mother Teresa's sisters in India. And I sent her off this email, hey, I got this great idea, let's go starve on Nike's wages in Indonesia.
And so he's like, I really need to go.
And she wrote me back, sounds great.
Let's go.
We plopped down in Tangerang, Indonesia, this industrial suburb outside of the capital of Jakarta, with the plans that for the next month we were going to live as Nike's factory workers lived, which meant that we were going to go live in a workers' slum outside of the capital, and we were going to live on the workers' wages, $1.25 a day for the next month, to try and come maybe to a better understanding of what it's like for Nike factory workers to make this kind of money and live under these conditions. We lived in a 9x9 cement box. It was over 100 degrees, it's 100% humidity, a small window, certainly no air conditioning.
No furniture. You slept on a very thin mat on an uneven cement floor covered in shelf paper.
The streets outside of your home are lined by open sewers, and what that means, like in the rainy season, you would have all that feces just float up into the streets and into your house.
And every time that you go to the bathroom, it comes back out into the sewer for everybody else to see and smell.
You would have football-sized rats that would stampede over the ceiling at night and come up through the toilet and look for stuff to eat in the house, or the fist-sized cockroaches that would crawl over you at night.
Siapa nama Anda? Saya. Daya. Nama Jim. Nama Jim, yeah.
Just like anyone around the world, you can't just drop into someone's life and be like, hi, we're here, we want to live in your life and tell us how much it sucks. You had to build bonds of trust.
Jim? Siri? Yenny? Nice to meet you.
They treated us very politely, and it wasn't until they saw that we were committed in the capacity of living on the wages that they're forced to live on, in the conditions that they are living in, that they felt that they could start to begin to trust us. You get to know them, and you hold their children, and you eat with them, and you share stories with them. They become part of your family.
We would go to different workers' homes. You got like 4 women sleeping in like an 8x8 cement box, and all their possessions are in there, like everything, in this small area.
The workers would have to share a bathroom with 5 to 10 other families. The workers would have to share a living quarters, actually, like a row of shacks with corrugated tin roofs. All of those families would share a laundry corner and a kitchen facility, and they would all share the same well to take the water out of.
$1.25 a day after you've paid for your rent, water, electricity, any major transportation costs, you're going to be left on average with roughly 7,000 rupiah per day. What the hell does that mean? That's going to buy you 2 simple meals of rice and vegetables, a bag of peanuts, a bottle of iced tea, and some dish detergent. And that's all you can get. And that's your reward?
Without a doubt. We found it out in the first week that we were there. There's no way that you can live on $1.25 a day and maintain your human dignity. It's just not possible.
I lost 25 pounds living on Nike's wages in Indonesia. I spent the month painfully hungry and tired and like near the point of exhaustion most days.
I just felt my energy storage was just depleted, and I just started going downhill fast, and I just started getting sick every day.
And she got very sick one day. She had like a fever of like 104, and she's got to deal with, well, I have a fever of 104, I can buy aspirin and like a little drink box to get some vitamin C, but if I buy those 2 things, I don't eat for the rest of the day.
I don't know what this is gonna do. Because we're gonna go home, we're gonna say, like, this is not enough money, and no one's gonna do a damn thing different.
How do you feel like a human being? How do you feel like your work, your gifts? You know, for them and the workers that I've talked to the last couple of days, a number of them said like the only thing we have is our physical labor. Because I just bought this smallest thing of shaving cream and 1 razor that I might be able to use 2 or 3 times that I have to cut out 3 meals this week. I don't know how these people do it.
They will be working overtime hours just to get by, because they can't possibly get by on the wage that they're paid without working incredible amounts of overtime. And when you're working up to 15 hours a day, 6 to 7 days a week, you know, your 2-year-old child just doesn't see you. You know, they don't get to see their children.
The kids can't even go to school. How are you going to break a cycle of poverty and have real economic development if you have a whole lost generation of children that aren't even educated? I'm walking down this dirt path into this village, and I see this massive pile of scrap shoe rubber that I later learned came from one of Nike's factories, and piles like that get dumped there all the time, and the end result of these piles is that they get burned in that village in the big open space where kids play, and the burning fumes I learned from the company that designs Nike shoe rubber will give off toxins and carcinogens. Kids are paying the price. And they're the ones with the chest infections, and they're the ones that are going to develop cancer. When we were in Indonesia, we made attempts to get into a Nike factory because Nike claims on their website we have nothing to hide.
I'm Mike.
Hi, Mike.
How you doing?
Good.
We went over to Nike's corporate offices, and Nike denied us that.
We're unable to accommodate that request. Yeah,
So long.
See ya.
Nike headquarters in Beaverton, Oregon had faxed an info sheet out to all the factories to be placed on the wall for all workers to see that read, if you are approached by Jim Keaty, Leslie Kretzer, or Mike Pirantozzi,
do not speak to them. They're only to speak to management. There will be severe consequences if you're found talking to them.
And they know from their management how they're supposed to act. And if they don't, there's some severe ramifications, anywhere from significant harassment to death. And I mean that in a very literal sense. Certainly management of the factory didn't want us to be there, and it was kind of frightening because we several times tried to get into the factory.
We weren't out of the van for more than 3 minutes, and there was security like surrounding us, and then the factory managers came out.
What's going on? We're outside a Nike shoe factory right now. Security's kind of surrounded us.
They're like, you know, what are you doing here? Well, you know, why are you here? It was frightening, you know, because who knows?
Security guy here tracking us down.
From that moment, we were tailed by factory security, the Praemen, or the local mafia. The local mafia certainly works in conjunction with these factory bosses. The factory bosses are, some of them are just brutal, ruthless, hired muscle to keep workers in line. And we met with one worker, Giulianto. He told us because he was union organized and he was trying to form an independent union.
He was threatened at gunpoint. He had his house ransacked. He was given death threats, and he had to flee back to his home village because, you know, in fear of his life. This is literally a life and death issue. And this happens at all the factories.
You know, every worker that we talked to, struggled with this fear, this culture of fear that just permeates the air. That, yeah, they want to tell you the truth and try and fight for their rights, but they also want their kids to have a father or a mother. They're dealing every day with the threat of losing their lives for doing this kind of work. I mean, they show tremendous courage in light of that. We were able to meet with a woman by the name of Dita Sari, who had been organizing Nike and Reebok factory workers at the age of 23 and was illegally jailed and put in prison and tortured.
In 8th of July 1996, I was arrested by the army, the local army in East Java. They kicked me and they used their fists and their sticks and their booth to hurt me and to torture me in front of the workers to show them an example.
I think that the majority of workers are saying, look, we don't want you to pull out the jobs. Like, we want to work. We like to work, you know. We want to make the shoes. We're proud of what we do, but we don't want to be exploited. Like, why can't you just let us meet our basic needs?
We're talking about food, clothing, housing, healthcare, education, being able to take care of your kids, and some modest savings. That's not a tall order.
Excuse me, do you guys know where the Nike campus is?
Yeah, you hang a right on Walker.
Yeah.
And you'll see it on your southwest corner.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so we're on Nike's campus right now. It's a little bit different than the factories in Indonesia, just a tiny bit.
Hi.
How you doing?
Hi, how are you?
Hi, good to see you. Nice to meet you finally. Yeah. Listen, I was hoping we could set up some time when we could talk. I'm really concerned about the workforce in Indonesia. You know, I spent the summer there living with them and living on the wages that are paid to the factory workers.
You worried about that?
Yeah.
Okay, why don't you call my secretary? Let's see what happens.
I did. I called Lisa last week. I called Beta. I called Dusty. I called Brad Feigl. I called Amanda.
You're going to have to talk to somebody else. Maybe we're going to talk to Dusty Kid.
But, I mean, you're the guy, the buck stops at you, right?
Yeah, it doesn't start with me, though.
I know, but I mean, I don't know who else to talk to. I've tried.
Dusty Kid.
He doesn't want to talk to me.
Well, then I guess you don't get through then.
But you're the man. I mean,
thank you.
You're the man that needs to.
I appreciate your concern, but I'm having lunch with a friend, and
no,
we'll talk about it.
I apologize for interrupting
Sorry about
lunch. I mean, I've come all the way from New Jersey to talk to you about this.
Well, I'm not talking to you.
I've gotten stonewalled at every turn. You know, the workers had asked of me that I try to bring you back to Indonesia, to meet them in their homes, not in, you know, the office in Jakarta.
Do you understand? No. You just gotta know. I'm not gonna talk to you about it.
Phil Knight, the CEO of Nike, or Michael Jordan, or Tiger Woods, or Mia Hamm, or any of the other people that are really making a lot of money because of the way that Nike does things, should care about these workers because they're human beings.
when I see people like Tiger Woods get $100 million just for wearing the clothes. We're saying as a society, like this one individual, because they play golf well, is worth more than 700,000 people.
This is an historic time for cooperation and the cooperative. Despite pressure in the UK economy, we have continued to do what we do best. Provide our members and customers with excellent products and services. And bring solid values and trust to the communities in which we operate.
We've made record sales of £13.7 billion.
We've invested a massive £11.3 million to support community projects.
The integration with Summerfield and Britannia has made great progress.
Our ethical policies for banking and investments,
food,
travel,
and now pharmacy have all remained strong.
Led by our members, we've made considerable progress on our community plan, which restates our commitment to 3 main areas: inspiring young people, tackling global poverty, and combating climate change.
We're inspiring young people to change their world.
When young people are presented with real opportunities, the results can be truly remarkable.
We're all from different areas and we've all come together, and it's just like a bit of team building, and this morning it's a competition.
The cooperative Street Games Young Volunteers helps disadvantaged young people to develop sports and community leadership skills.
Yes, we're winning.
And the new Truth About Youth grants programme supports organisations around the UK that enable young people to make positive contributions in their local communities.
Today is all about the engagement of young people and to put across their debate the Votes at 16.
We've joined the Votes at 16 coalition to campaign for the voting age to be lowered so that young people are more engaged with society.
I think what the cooperative does is a sign of what the future holds.
Our Green Schools activities are changing the way our young people see the world.
Installing green energy solutions in schools, promoting walking buses and teaching school children about sustainable tourism is showing future generations practical and positive solutions.
We're making a real difference to the lives of 250,000 young people in the UK.
We're also hard at work helping communities around the world to tackle poverty.
We've made Fairtrade accessible to millions more shoppers.
Our integration with Summerfield means that our fair trade products are available in hundreds more stores, making them accessible to millions more UK consumers and benefiting thousands more fair trade producers and workers. Meanwhile, we're providing extra investment to communities that need it most. Development funds for our fair trade sugar producers in Malawi, establishing funeral cooperatives in South Africa, and promoting cooperative links between hoteliers and farmers in Turkey through the Travel Foundation. We're working hard to combat climate change. As well as being one of the world's largest purchasers of renewable energy, we're becoming more energy efficient every year. Meanwhile, our Toxic Fuels campaign challenges the development of carbon-intensive toxic fuels, such as tar sands. In support of this, members came out across the UK to mark the launch of the powerful new film, Dirty Oil.
What I love about the Co-op is they really put their money where their mouth is, and they get behind these things that affect us all, and they don't just leave you with, hey, here's the problem. They say, hang on a minute, we've also come up with the solution. Here's what you can do.
Members and their families also joined the WAVE Climate Change March, the biggest mobilisation of our membership base in recent times.
I think it's something that people do really need to start doing something about.
I think it's going to be great.
And we're making great progress on our other environmental objectives.
We've hit our target on reducing packaging a year ahead of schedule.
We've cut the use of carrier bags.
and we're encouraging our customers and members to do their bit.
We've seen a 38% increase in current account openings.
This was a landmark year for cooperative financial services. Against the backdrop of the banking crisis, we completed the merger with Britannia, relaunched the bank's unique customer-led ethical policy and extended it to Britannia. We launched new sustainable investment products and created a new social banking unit, which looks to provide £2 billion of finance for community housing, schools, charities and renewable energy projects.
And we're investing in the future.
Through our Skills for Schools programme, we're using our expertise to transfer key skills to young people, helping to educate a new generation on areas such as future employability and money management.
We've now got 5 million members across the UK.
Our values and principles have given us great strength at a time of reduced confidence in business. And today, our customers, members and colleagues are as active as ever in events, initiatives and community activities. Thousands have taken part in events to raise money for charity, raising over £3.7 million for the Royal National Institute for the Deaf and £3 million for Macmillan.
And thousands more have supported our popular Plan B campaign, raising the awareness of bee decline in the UK.
Bees need our help. It turns out to have little holes in it. 1/3 of the bees died last year.
Through the Cooperative Enterprise Hub, we're investing millions of pounds over the next few years to support the wider cooperative sector. We're working hard to bring the values and principles of cooperation into the educational system for a whole new generation.
We're growing, and in line with that growth, we're constructing a new world-class head office.
Today, cooperation is as relevant, successful and as exciting as it's ever been, and the cooperative is at the very heart of it. We're celebrating our resurgence and looking forward to the future with confidence. And being a part of it, whether as a colleague, a customer or a member, means that you're a part of something that's making a real difference in the world.
Together,
we are making a real difference
to real people
in communities,
both here in the UK
and around the world.
The cooperative. Good.
The world is becoming more and more interconnected. Never before in human history has there existed such an intense relationship between international trade, communication, and politics. The term globalization is all around us, sometimes as an opportunity, sometimes as a new challenge. But what exactly does globalization mean, and what are its ramifications? Even though the term globalization is frequently used, it is not easy to define. One thing is clear: in today's world, economic, environmental, social, and political issues and problems are no longer limited to the national level because the world has become so interdependent. Reasonable governance can only be realized within broader groups of stakeholders. For example, state confederations such as the European Union, regional economic organizations like the OECD, or the whole world. Today, modern communication technology and mass media like radio, TV, phones, or internet are global standard. This means that information can be distributed worldwide in real time at affordable prices. For instance, the average price of a telephone call from New York to London has decreased by 99% since 1930. International TV broadcasters deliver information, opinions, and cultural products to the most remote areas. The cost for transportation of products and persons dropped by 65% since 1930, due to low fuel prices and the development of new means of transportation, in particular container shipping. Air freight costs have dropped even more, 88%. the freight charges for a ton of coffee delivered from Asia to Europe only accounts for 1% of its price. Such developments are the result of technological advancements, but there are some aspects which were introduced purposefully as well. Since the 1980s, the richer, more industrialized countries worked toward removing trade barriers, such as tariffs, import quotas, and bans worldwide. Thus, new technologies, decreasing transportation costs, and the liberalization of international trade has made it possible and profitable for major companies to produce and sell worldwide. Let's take a glance at the three main areas of globalization. The economic sphere is of particular importance. It is a major catalyst for globalization and is, at the same time, the most affected area. International exports have increased 30-fold in the last 60 years. The foreign direct investment of companies and governments has increased substantially. It's risen from $13 billion per year in 1970 to more than $1.8 trillion today. Many companies are searching for new markets and opportunities for cheap production in countries with low wages and soft environmental regulations. The number of such multinational corporations rose from 7,000 to 65,000 since the 1990s. Similar to the world economy, international politics is also more interdependent today. Most important policy issues, like climate change, the financial crisis, or terrorism, do not care about borders. Such problems cannot be solved by a single state alone. Politics tries to react by attempting to make decisions in broader groups of countries, like the EU, the G20, or even the United Nations. At the same time, there are more and more international pressure groups which do not belong to a particular state. These so-called non-governmental organizations, or NGOs, are able to exert influence in politics related to their field of work. Examples include Greenpeace, Amnesty International, or ATTAC. A global public forum evolves through the previously mentioned new possibilities of communication. NGOs use this in order to influence politics. International political problems and the emergence of new global actors like NGOs and multinational corporations lead to a decrease of the political latitude of single states, especially of small states. The influence of globalization can be observed in our culture as well. One aspect is often referred to as McWorld. The term describes how Western culture, especially popular culture, becomes dominant and destroys cultural diversity. The global distribution of Western music, news, products, and even the English language promotes this effect. To counter globalization, we can also see backlash. For example, people are increasingly returning to local and regional cultural customs. Globalization is a very complex development. Some countries benefit more, others benefit less. Newly industrialized countries like Taiwan and South Korea, as well as the rapidly developing India, Brazil, and China, gain considerable advantage from their integration into the world economy. They can build up their factories with foreign direct investment and infrastructure and sell their products internationally. Due to the low wages in these countries, these products are very competitive on the world market. China represents a perfect example of how the broader population can benefit too. Its fast economic growth has enabled 500 million Chinese to leave extreme poverty. On the other hand, there are whole regions who are suffering more than they are benefiting from globalization. This is particularly true for most sub-Saharan African countries. Such countries are not prepared sufficiently for tightened international competition. The cheap products produced by industrial and newly industrialized countries flood the local markets and destroy local productive facilities. Moreover, these countries are not attractive for foreign investors. Thus, they cannot walk the same road as the newly industrialized countries. Globalization is both a threat and an opportunity for industrialized countries. On the one hand, they can acquire new markets for their industrial goods. On the other hand, they are facing the competition of newly industrialized countries that can produce at lower costs. Specifically, the production of simple goods is no longer profitable, and very few products, like textiles, toys, or white goods, are still produced in industrialized countries.
Took 2,300 years for standards of living to rise by 50% from the time of Pericles in Athens to the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. Today, in China and many parts of Asia, it takes a half dozen years to achieve that much progress. That's a change in history that ranks only with the Industrial Revolution and the Renaissance. It's going to change everything from the role of the United States to what happens in the global environment, to the prospects for financial stability, to whether a well-functioning trading system is consistent with a strong middle class. We believe that how the world meets that challenge is going to depend on how well it's understood, how well it's analyzed, and how well those analyses are translated into concrete policy actions. And that's the focus of our course.
In the future, our students will have to cope with hard problems. So rather than propose that today we'll teach them the answers that they'll need to know at 25 and 35 and 45, what we hope to really accomplish is teach them a way of really grappling with the hard problems, because seat of the pants and intuition is just not the right way to think about complex systems. There is no intuition that will lead you to the right answers about problems of how globalization to work. It actually takes analysis, it actually takes evidence, it actually takes reasoning, and good reasoning can lead to good outcomes, and bad reasoning can lead to bad outcomes. So what we hope is that whatever problems our students face in the future, the habits of thought and experience of thinking through these issues will lead them to make better decisions.
This is the most exciting moment to be thinking about economic questions since the Second World War, because events have thrown everything up in the air, and we don't know where it's all going to come down. We do know that there's a lot of new thinking that's required, and this course is going to try to help you understand that new thinking, and by putting you in key policy-making roles, give you a chance to contribute to that new thinking. This is a course that will use theory, and we'll talk about theory, but not theory for its own sake, theory for the sake of translation into action to create a better world. And hopefully we'll show in that process that the right kind of understanding can change minds, and that can change lives.
In recent decades, China has seen unparalleled economic growth, and this country's environment has faced an unprecedented assault. Rivers, which can only be described as toxic, are everywhere to be seen. If you choose a random city or town here and go looking for a waterway, you'll be very lucky if it's fit for any human use. We saw people growing vegetables next to a river which has turned black. They're either oblivious to the state of this water, are ignoring the dangers of using it, or have no other choice. Then there's the air quality. China's air pollution problem is enormous. The impact of coal-fired power stations and heavy industry is felt right across the country. And when it comes to industrial pollution of all types, factory employees are at the front line. This hospital in Suzhou has been treating more than 100 workers who breathed in the vapours of a dangerous chemical. It was being used in the production of computers, and in particular, they say, Apple products. We snuck in to visit some of the workers who are still being treated. They didn't want to show their faces.
我在医院现在就是半年多一点，我想照这个发展来看吧，就是病得好的情况下，应该在年底差不多会出院的。
开始影响感觉挺明显的，就是手麻嘛，然后走路的话走不动，然后跑也跑不起来那种感觉。
These young women used to finish off laptop computers by gluing on, measuring and then polishing Apple logos. For this they used a chemical called N-hexane. One of the women has kept some of the logos they used to show that their work was connected to Apple products.
他们应该知道这个有毒，就是对人体身体有毒害的。因为如果说换其他的话，它那个基本上的那个质量，就是说产能提不起来。如果用其他的话，因为用这个正乙烷那个酒精擦拭的话，它质量那个成品那些可以提高好多。
The workers have recovered considerably in recent months. They met us outside the hospital and showed us what it was like when they couldn't walk properly. Doctors say that prolonged exposure to N-hexane can harm the nervous system, lead to muscle damage and even cause paralysis.
空间特别小，然后还没有那个通风设备。
Their small factory was hidden away in this building, and their boss, Zhong Jiansheng, refused to be interviewed for the program. It doesn't look like it, but Apple computers were being finished off in a little workshop here. At least the workers assumed that the laptops were not fakes. But importantly, if you house an operation like this in a residential alleyway, you're doing so away from the prying eyes of work safety inspectors and the like. But working for a large company doesn't guarantee your safety either. Hu Zhiyong, Jia Jingchuan, and more than 100 of their workmates also became sick after breathing in the vapours from the chemical N-hexane. They and 60 of their colleagues were hospitalised for more than 9 months.
Our company mainly produces touch screens for mobile phones. Our main client is Apple.
In October 2008, our company introduced a new kind of chemical solvent. We only knew that it was effective for wiping. It would dry off in 1 or 2 seconds.
Unlike the women we met, theirs is a big established factory with its headquarters in Taiwan. So when workers started collapsing at the factory by the dozen, it was not going to be good for their companies or for China's reputation as a manufacturer. The sensitivity of this issue became clear when a plainclothes policeman of some type filmed us using a secret camera in his bag. We turned our own camera on him and he left quickly. We were followed everywhere we went in Suzhou.
I am back at work, but my symptoms are still with me. My legs still hurt. This will accompany me for the rest of my life. It's very painful.
Their company, Wintech, has now stopped using N-hexane. Nobody from this company, which employs 20,000 people, was available to be interviewed when we visited. And their security guards were keen for us to stop filming.
那我觉得你们要全力告诉我们不拍你们的楼从外面，我们在路上拍，我们不是在里面拍你们什么东西。我们做一个报道关于你们的公司，你应该告诉你的老板，这是他的机会跟我们说话。
be fair to this company, the workers say that Wintec did look after them when they got sick, by paying their medical bills and keeping their jobs for them for when they got out of hospital. Yet under Chinese law, its workers will only get compensation if they leave these jobs. But it's not only in making computers that China is having problems with toxins. When countries like Australia, the United States and Japan are finished with their keyboards, laptops, hard drives and motherboards, they go back to China to be pulled apart and recycled. This is a thriving business in places like Wenling in Zhejiang province. Children pitching in to help their parents learn of its value at a young age. Mercury, lead, chromium and other poisons from this e-waste leach into the groundwater.
China is sacrificing its own environment at both ends of the production life of these computers. In this way, it's effectively subsidising other countries. People all over the world are getting cheap electrical goods, in part because China is trashing its air, its earth and its waterways.
强调，再到那个粉碎机上面破碎，破碎以后再洗料机洗一下就可以了。
In Zhejiang, these are principally jobs for migrant workers. Poor farmers who've drifted into bigger towns and cities looking for work. In this cluster of shacks, a group of families who've travelled from Anhui province live and work together.
有的人说这个工作是对这里的自然环境有不好的影响，你觉得是这样的吗？
怎么说？这个说不好。
Apart from overall environmental damage, in the short term it's the health of these workers and their families which could suffer. Nearby, we saw women sorting recycled computer plastic by burning it with a cigarette lighter and sniffing the fumes. By sniffing the plastic, they can quickly identify its type. Imagine the damage to your brain from sniffing burned plastic every few seconds, all day, every day. This woman didn't want to speak on camera. It would be wrong to think that in China there's no awareness of industrial pollution and its effects on people. It would also be wrong to think that there's nobody trying to fight against it.
Early this year, we received an email from these villagers saying there were pollution problems here. So we came to have a look. We think this is a strong case, so we decided to provide legal assistance for them. Many villagers have died from liver or brain cancer or other types of cancer over the last 2 years.
Liu Jinmei and Liu Yanping work for the only Chinese law firm that specialises in environmental pollution. And here, they've walked into the middle of what's become quite a large fight. The historic Qingpuling village in the hills above Minho in Fujian province is in a beautiful location. For generations, its inhabitants grew fruit here, and they remained a tight-knit community. Then the new neighbours moved in. For the last 9 years, an incinerator has been churning out its dark discharges next to the village. The company will soon process industrial material, but at the moment says it's burning medical waste.
The medical waste includes the drips when you're hospitalized, and stuff for surgery, bandages, things cut off people's bodies, as well as needles and bottles. They are all medical waste.
If you go anywhere near this incinerator, you get an idea of how far the wind has carried the smoke. All of the leaves here are smeared with this black gunk, and the locals say that the whole valley is covered in it.
No one knows who'll be next to die. Many villagers get dizzy and have palpitations. When we work in the field, as soon as we breathe in the disgusting smoke, we get dizzy.
Lin Guanghao was born in this village. After school, he joined the Air Force and says he devoted the best part of his youth to the Communist Party. These days, he's angry.
11 villagers have died within 2 years.
每个人都知道，还去年注意一下扶持好几个。我一家人，你的孙子啊，我哥哥的孙子，我妹叔的儿子，我妹叔31岁、32岁，59岁，1年扣了33个人啊。
The villagers believe that it's definitely pollution from the incinerator which has been killing off their loved ones. The lawyers say there's still no solid proof to directly link these deaths to the incinerator in a court case. But for their purposes, they don't need to prove that the company's pollution has been killing people.
Chinese law states that people should not live within 800 meters of a dangerous goods management plant. In fact, these villages live less than 200 meters, which is very close, so there's no doubt that they're being harmed.
In China, power politics often intervenes when disputes like this arise. Police and government officials somehow heard that we were in town and they came to pay us a call. A government official told me that they could help us, and then asked a question that would be put to us again and again. Many villagers think that the local government and police have been working hand in hand with the company. So when they thought the local authorities were trying to stop us from interviewing them, you could feel the tension building. They started letting these government officials know what they thought of them.
Don't we have the right to speak? As citizens, isn't it our basic right to speak? Can't we express our grief? Isn't this our right? Nobody should try to stop us speaking, no matter who it is, especially the government. We didn't act violently. Why do they always send in the police? Well, we have a question. Are they putting pressure on the villagers to stop us talking about pollution? They don't want to solve the problem. They just want to put pressure on us.
Sustainable development has become the mantra for the 21st century. In this series, Develop or Die, we're exploring how some in the developing world are beginning to believe that sustainable development is being used increasingly as a convenient argument by the richer world to protect their global economic dominance. In the first programme, we looked at the powerful emerging economies of India and China. Now we turn to two of the smaller Asian tigers. Oil palms dominate the landscape of Malaysia. Regimented plantations cover more than 4 million hectares of land, that's roughly the size of Switzerland, and provide work for some 750,000 people. Malaysia and Indonesia are the world's largest producers of palm oil. Malaysia is the largest exporter. The oil is used in woks and frying pans, in processed food products and cosmetics and detergents. Around a tenth of products in Western supermarkets contain palm oil. Last year, these exports were worth $13 billion to Malaysia alone.
If you look at the rural development in general, oil palm cultivation has brought about tremendous amount of growth and income levels, increase in income levels for the rural population. And you look at electrification and transport, the road that has been built as a result of oil palm developments.
Smallholders in Malaysia still produce nearly 1/3 of the palm oil. A government project helps 110,000 families to do so. The scheme gives poor landless farmers small plots on which to grow palm oil. The crop has helped narrow the gap between urban and rural incomes and slash the numbers of the desperately poor in Malaysia.
Now we are able to send our children to school, right through to higher education, for example. Then for us, before we could only afford a motorcycle. Later, we were able to buy a car. And now, finally, we can buy this house.
Malaysia has doubled its production of palm oil over the past decade. And although only a small proportion of Malaysia's palm oil is currently used as biofuel, this is still a very emotive issue.
The enormous growth of recent years has been very much a consequence of our decision in Europe and North America to go for a much larger proportion of biofuel in the petrol ration. So our policy has been driving change in patterns of land use and deforestation, you know, on the other side of the world. I think we have a responsibility there to recognize that decisions we take have these impacts far, far away.
The surge in palm oil production is already a major concern to Western environmental groups. They've targeted the palm oil industry in Malaysia and Indonesia with aggressive and emotive publicity campaigns, accusing the industry of destroying rainforests and threatening endangered species.
You'll find, for example, that Indonesia, which is the world's leading palm oil supplier, is the third largest greenhouse gas polluter on the planet after the United States and China. And nearly all of that is because of what's happening in the rainforest and in the peatlands.
Malaysia says in its defence that most palm oil is grown on land previously used for other crops such as rubber. And the major players in the industry resent the sweeping nature of environmental campaigns.
It's a great shame if the entire industry is painted with the same brush, and that is the thing which we often feel has been the case in some of these campaigns against palm oil, and that's most regrettable.
Now, if it's all about bashing and bashing and bashing without spending time and listening to reasons or spending time really understanding what's happening on the ground, it'll never end. And it's not going to help anybody, because it's going to basically result in a lot of miscommunication. It's going to result in a lot of resentment, and at the end of the day, nobody's going to win.
The industry says it's now taken a giant step forward with the creation of a new initiative, the Round Table on Sustainable Palm Oil. It brings together producers, manufacturers, retailers and environmental groups to come up with a definition for sustainable palm oil.
This is the first time where you've had a huge multi-stakeholder process with so many different parties involved. They've sat around through dialogue, through consensus, agreed on a set of principles and criteria, which today are the strictest in terms of sustainability known for any agricultural crop in the world.
Teams of independent auditors visit palm oil operations.
No film of oil on the surface, so that's good.
Checking to see whether companies are protecting the environment and looking after the welfare of workers. Malaysia's biggest producer, Sime Darby, point out that they've received praise from some Western environmental experts for the efforts they're making, but they say that they're also aware that in the end, it's the consumer who is king and driving change.
Just having the product is not enough now. People now want to know where the products come from. They want to know how the products are made, whether there's been any, unrequired sacrifices, so to speak, in actually producing the product.
But not everyone is convinced that the Round Table is successfully curbing bad practices.
It's not just greenwashing that you've got, but you've got a fundamentally flawed system, because you can only actually deal with the whole concept of getting sustainable palm oil if the companies themselves are sustainable. You can't say patch of ground over here is sustainable and put a little certificate on the product, while at the same time the same company is involved in wholesale destruction of rainforests and peatland clearance somewhere else. That just doesn't make sense. So our demands on the RSPO, the Round Table on Sustainable Palm Oil, are basically, clean up your act.
The big companies are looking to do this by improving the efficiency of plantations and therefore relieving pressure on remaining rainforests. However, Western demand for palm oil is likely to continue to grow. That will earn countries like Malaysia more in export earnings, but is also likely to push up prices for people across the developing world who use it as cooking oil. It's a dilemma some in the industry say they're well aware of.
Palm oil by far has better productivity numbers compared to soya or any other edible oils. So the world, I think, would be better off using palm oil as an energy source. However, having said all that, we are also very concerned about this food and energy debate that's going on. And we like to make sure that whatever we do now and in the future is a responsible action.
Yet the future is just as likely to be determined by global economics, dictated a long way from Malaysia.
Europe has pursued a biofuels target with little regard to the impacts environmentally and socially of what large-scale plantation biofuels does in the communities where biofuels plantations are sited.
We Westerners cannot deprive the people in the developing nations from also wanting to improve their livelihood. It's a balance, and this is something which we have to accept, we have to appreciate. Okay, there has to be that balance. There has to be that balance in terms of development and protection or conservation.
The fact is, palm oil is representative of something bigger. The environment versus economic development. Crops for food in balance with food for fuel. Consumer demand in the West influencing livelihoods in the East.
The split between the wealthier countries, the so-called global north, and the developing countries, the global south, it's often portrayed as though the north is more interested in environmental concerns and the south more interested in development, and I think that's a misnomer. That's not correct.
I think we want to see this grain debate go on forever, simply because we only have one Mother Earth. We cannot afford to lose it.
For many nations in the developing world, the pressure is often biased towards development rather than sustainability. And now that their economies are more likely to fuel global growth in the next few years, they are more than ever questioning why they should be punished by Western-imposed standards.
After the break, we travel to Vietnam and look at tourism, what's claimed to be the biggest industry in the world, and ask whether it can ever be truly sustainable.